Thank you so much, Rick. And I'd love for Sandy and then Chris to just introduce themselves.
Thanks, Anna. Sandy Wallace. I am a co-founder and managing director of Weather Gauge Capital. We are a $1 billion venture fund of funds. We've invested about $700 million in venture capital partnerships based out of Palo Alto. But I've been living here in Houston since about 2005. More recently, I've started with HX Venture Fund, which you may have heard of, a venture capital fund of funds here in Houston, focused on developing the tech ecosystem here.
Good evening. I'm Chris Stoffel. I'm a serial entrepreneur. I've been on the founding team of 3 different natural gas pipeline companies, all private equity backed. And now I'm currently transitioning over into the ag space and I'm becoming a farmer.
Awesome. So, Chris, you took a company public and you had to build a board for that. Can you walk us through that process and the different types of roles you looked for when you built it out?
Sure, of course. So it was backed by natural gas partners, and when your private equity firm gives you $250 million at day one and says go, they also have a lot of say over who's on the board for your company as well. And so there's less decision making on the management team. However, the flip side and the great thing about that is that you have access to all their LPs and to their vast networks. So we strategically looked in, and they had 3 seats on the board, and then our management team had 2 seats, and we had to fill 3 independent director board seats. And so we really wanted a good mix of regulatory, industry perspective, and also we were scaling this company. The company was started with the intent to take it public. So from day one, we were already trying to prepare our S1, and while we didn't even have the contracts yet or the assets. And so there's 6 of us that started the company, and we scaled it to, I hired 80 people within the first 14 months. So we also wanted someone strategically on the board that could help with hiring and compensation. It was really helpful, and so we got that.
Amazing. And so, Sandy, can you dive a little bit more into what a good balance of a board should be? In Chris's case, her board obviously worked really well for her. And should the founder be worried, in some cases, that they might lose control or get fired?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think Rick, by the way, did a really nice job of laying out when you start a board and the numbers, the composition, that board scales as the outside capital scales in the company. One of the things we look closely at when we're evaluating a venture capital firm and the underlying boards that they sit on at the startup level is the mix between the investor community and the founding community, and is that balanced? And something I've seen is a natural instinct among founders is to say, I need to make sure that my founding community is outweighing the investing community. I don't want to lose control. A couple of things to say to that. One would be, if you really think your VC is such that you're seeing him or her as losing control, then you probably shouldn't take that equity. That's probably not the right first step. If you want to take on outside capital, you should see that person as a partner going forward at the board level. So that would be, one important comment I'd make to that. In addition to that, one of the natural concerns of a founder is, gosh, if I have, 2-to-1 investor ratio between investors and founders, I could get fired. Yes, technically true, but really what you want to think about is, that venture capitalist that you're partnering with, they have no interest really in creating that kind of disruption in the company. They have no economic or strategic interest in doing so. So again, don't partner with outside capital that you don't think is a true partner for you. And secondly, really don't be so fearful, I would suggest, of those kinds of situations. It's very rare. It can happen, but it's not likely to happen.
Awesome. Thank you. And Rick, so you gave us a really good example of where, the board dynamics didn't really work out. But in your experience with the 7 public companies and the 11 private that you sat on and the 50 investments you've made, can you give us an example of where it was a really good fit and maybe led to an exit?
Yes. So I had the very great pleasure of serving on a board for approximately 4 years. And during that time, we had the ability to sell the company and take it to a very successful exit that was acquired by a strategic company. It was acquired by a software company called VMware. And during that 3.5 years or so, we, about 12 months in, developed a strategy that how we were going to exit this company. The CEO and the co-founder worked very hard with me to do that. We ended up identifying 4 or 5 companies. We sold this company with those 2 founders and the employees having approximately 70% of the company. The investors had about 30%, and we sold that company for right around $80 million, plus an earnout that they will achieve as they go forward in VMware. So it was a very, very life-changing opportunity for those entrepreneurs and employees who, with the guidance of the founder and co-founder, worked very hard to achieve a great exit in about 4 years.
Awesome. And so it's been interesting to hear from all of you how board fit is such an important part of selecting your board. And Chris, can you give us an example where somebody on your board may not have been a likely fit, but actually worked out better than expected?
Sure. The person I was talking about with only 3 spots for our board, I wouldn't gravitate to, especially for a natural gas pipeline company, I wouldn't have naturally gravitated towards an executive recruiter. But at the end of the day, it actually was perfect because that's what we needed as we scaled this company. And especially for me, being executive officer of a public company for the first time, to have that validation and someone who actually really wanted to get into the weeds. This was his first public company board. So I know we're always looking for really experienced candidates who had multiple board experiences, but sometimes it's the ones who are more eager to get involved that are actually there, in the meetings, prepared for the meetings. I mean, he ran the audit committee and he was phenomenal.
And then Sandy, can we expand a little bit more on what a founder should look for in a good board member? Rick mentioned that you should expect 6 to 12 meetings. Is someone local a good idea, or is it okay to have someone further away? And what other kinds of things should you be looking for?
I totally agree with Rick's opening remarks on this topic, where I don't think it's about the famous big name. I think the best board member is the local person that you have a real affiliation with, somebody that you can open up to and whose opinion you respect. I think that will go a lot further than the big name. There are many opinions on that one. In addition, I love this phrase that I've heard that stays in my mind when I serve on a board, which is the best board members are heads in and nose out. So they're strategic helpers, but they shouldn't be doing the operational work, and they should know when to lean in and when to back out.
And so, Chris, do you have any sort of lessons learned when you were, what would you do differently if you had to do it all over again, if anything? Or was it the most perfect board ever?
It's never the most perfect, and there's always lessons to be learned. And I think that if I could have done it differently in that specific instance, the CEO really wanted to have a woman on the board. And so we had Ambassador Jordan, who was incredible and covered our legal regulatory process bucket and gave us amazing macro insight into the oil and gas industry, having served as an ambassador in Saudi Arabia during the Bush administration. And then we had Rick Walker, who was also the executive recruiter, helping with that. And so I already had legal and HR, and honestly, if I wanted, I hate to say it, but if I wanted a woman, it would be easier to find in that bucket when we really needed a midstream industry candidate. And so at the end of the day, I wasn't able to fill with a woman. So if I did it differently, I would have looked for that position first and foremost, and then filled appropriately. I mean, currently what I'm doing right now with my company, I joke that I'm becoming a farmer just because I enjoy saying that. But we literally are, it's Curation Farms, and we formed the company in April, just newly formed, and we're going into the industrial hemp space. The regulatory agency, President Trump, signed the Farm Bill to go into action, and so now it's federally legal. And across all of our nation, and so we are building out a test pilot crop in Oregon. And what keeps me awake at night, all the different things that I think, okay, what's going to go wrong, what's going to go wrong, what's going to go wrong, I'm basically building out an advisory board. Okay, these are the people that can help me with that. I also think that my favorite game growing up was the game of life, and so I think about that when I'm building a company and think through the entire course of that little, your little game piece, and think about the tiles. If I landed on one of those tiles, it's going to either get me stuck or it's going to make me go all the way to the beginning. I want to make sure that I have the board candidates right there. They'll be my advisors.
And so, Sandy, do you have an example of where somebody actually stepped away from a board that you've seen because it wasn't the right fit from the investor perspective? Or have you seen it where maybe a VC wouldn't, go in because the board dynamics didn't work for them and a different type of company stepped in and took a role?
I have seen that situation. So startups, entrepreneurs are often thinking, do I want to keep working with this VC or not? Who should I partner with at the venture capital level? You have a choice there between sometimes partnering with somebody who's most strategic to you or not. And I think oftentimes it's just very important to make sure that the fit is the right thing there. Don't necessarily just go for the name or the provenance of that VC, but actually focus in on the strategic issues you're trying to solve. And remembering that doesn't necessarily come with brand.
So what I just heard is that a really well-balanced board can really work for you as a founder and be really powerful. And so, Rick, can we dive more into, and this is from the audience, the key success factors that played into that exit 4 years from start so quickly?
So it was the willingness, first of all, on the part of the two co-founders to say that an exit in that kind of price range was achievable and desirable. It was a lot of work on their part to identify the key potential acquirers, and then the process we built to actually work in their, to get inside of those companies to identify the right people who could make the decisions with respect to requirements. Those entrepreneurs did all of that work. And it wasn't until the last 8 months of the process that we eventually engaged with an investment bankers. So we actually shopped it to one other potential acquirer, and that helped us with the eventual acquirer. And so the investment bankers, about 8 months into the process, and after we opened the deal room, so to speak, to do that kind of work was very, very supportive also. And so the fees that the entrepreneurs were willing to give up to have that kind of outside influence and help also made a big difference too. And that was, so I give really 80% of the credit to the founder and co-founder for their willingness to do all of those things that eventually led to a lot of very happy people at that company. And that company only had 17 people when it was acquired for $80 million.
And so, and this could be for any of you, is this, you think, a typical trajectory for a company to exit, or are there key points that you should be covering in the strategy sessions as you're starting to think about exits? Is there, like a checklist, or what do you suggest?
Well, there is kind of a checklist, but you have to go do 3 or 4 things first. You have to acquire customers, paying customers, or you have to be on a trajectory. If you're a life science company, it's completely different. Let's not get into that now, but there's a whole different track if you're a pharmaceutical company. But you have to have customers, paying customers in most of these companies. You have to have great teams and great talent on board. So, because sometimes, or the great majority of the time, these strategic acquirers are not just acquiring the technology, they're acquiring you and you and you. They're acquiring a team. So building great teams is a big part of it. And then finally, you have to build some good, really kick-ass technology that these large organizations are going to want, that differentiates them because they don't have it today. So the ability to understand how to build differentiated technology, listen, that big companies don't have. They don't have everything. So you have to be able to find your niche, so to speak, in the world of tremendous competitors.
And to add on to that, as an entrepreneur, a lot of times we get stuck and mired into the operations and I've got to build this company. But it's equally important to always have an outward-facing partner or a presence because you're constantly selling the company. You're constantly moving, inching the needle towards that exit.
And so whose role would you say is it to find these, once you've built these technology and the team and you think you're in the right place, where are companies finding these strategic acquirers and at what point are you starting these relationships with them? That could be for whoever wants to take it.
Well, I think the entrepreneurs have an obligation to do that. They should be knowledgeable enough to help identify potential acquirers for their business and technology. That's part of their job. So I put it more on the founder to have the most domain expertise in that area.
And I would just add, depending on the stage of investment, the VC should be able to bring it
Sure.
up to the table.
In fact, if there's VCs, and boy, that's a whole level of value add and contribution. And
That you should
those,
expect.
yes, and those people certainly have a tremendous Rolodex and a tremendous amount of knowledge, domain knowledge in the field.
And the beautiful thing about it too is that many times your customers are the ones that are going to buy you out.
Yes.
So the stronger relationships and knowledge that you have about your customer base, the more likelihood that you will be able to, as you build your company, create this thing where, because you're a small team, you're nimble enough and flexible enough to where you can really build something quicker than the larger strategics, but then you can go out and sell it to them.
And oftentimes they have funds. Many software, most companies today of any size will have their own inside biz dev and venture capital funds that they will invest in companies, and oftentimes, to your point, will eventually potentially be an acquirer of the business also down the road. Not all the time, but many times.
Yeah, especially in areas maybe where they're not specialized. I think we had dinner last week with somebody who had told me they're looking for a specific technology in the HR space, and if there are any smaller companies, they'd be happy to acquire them versus grow it in-house. So I think that's a pretty common way to go. So when should strategic advisors be brought on, and can we sort of unpack the differences between the advisory board a little more and the board of directors and the different roles they might play when they should come in?
So again, as I was saying in my presentation, I think advisory boards can be very helpful at any point in your stage of having a good company. If you're using an advisory board effectively, they can be a tremendous value add to you. And so you can almost form them at the very onset of your company. And they, as I said, can be very, very helpful to you. I think the boards that we just got finished talking about here, they're not getting formed until you get outside investors. And oftentimes, the right kind of capital has to come in to do that. And as I said in one of my Q&A things here, these advisory boards should stay on. If they're adding value and they're helping the entrepreneur or the founders, they should be staying on and continuing that role and responsibility.
And are they, sorry, go ahead.
For me, I view the advisory board just as important as the first couple of employees that I'm going to be hiring. And I start thinking about that well before the company's even formed. I mean, we formed this company April 4th, and I'm already thinking about 6 strategic partners that I want to have. And also, I'll be honest, we're doing a capital raise of $1.75 million, so those 6 are going to be able to help me get other investors in the door.
And then, in your case or in other cases, are they compensated? How are they compensated? And you mentioned that they should stay on, but is there a typical life, cycle of an advisory board person that, they sign a 12-month contract, or how does that normally work?
Typically, they're, as you get further along in terms of your development of your company, you can formalize the advisory boards. I would say in most cases they're not in the beginning, although you will give them equity. I think you should be prepared to give each one of them a 0.5% to 1% equity, sometimes even a little more, depending on their what you're asking them to focus and work on. So it's not cash compensation. Cash is very precious in these early stages of companies. but there is an equity component to them that should be expected by the entrepreneur to provide to these people.
I would just add that the alignment that, is the important part there too, right?
Sure.
So you want to incent them, but you're also just looking for alignment on that board.
And are they providing more specific guidance, you would say, or is it more large-scale general advice like the board of advisors? Or are you looking to fill holes, whether it's fundraising or I really need a lawyer and they're doing some legal work for you? Sort of, what do they actually do for you as an advisory board?
It's generally more specific, so it's some component of the technology, it's some component of the market, it's some component of a selling aspect, it's some component of employees.
Fundraising.
Or fundraising. It's generally some specificity with respect to what you want those advisors to focus and accomplish.
And is that something you should lay out in the contracts of,
Yes.
set of
They
expectations?
should create an expectation. Oftentimes a written document, I think, is more helpful in these cases as opposed to just sitting across the table over coffee and doing this.
And what's helpful about creating your advisory board first is that it gives you kind of a audition period or a tryout period to see if it actually is a good fit, and you get to see who's really a working board member versus just, well, I can't get a hold of you because you're in Bermuda somewhere. So it's helpful, and then they also see if it's a good fit too, right? It's vice versa. It's both. I sit on 3 boards right now, and it's very interesting to navigate that process of am I a good fit for this company and or for this nonprofit.
Yeah, with our incubator, our companies would always jump to ask people to be their advisors and on their board, but we would always tell them to almost date a little bit because sometimes it's not actually that nice of a thing to be asked sometimes if it's not a very good fit, and you want to be able to understand that you're spending a lot of time with these people. So I definitely echo that. And so somebody had asked, and maybe Sandy, you can take this since we do a lot of kind of VC scope. Is it not true that if there was a popular technologist or somebody, the CEO of a large-scale big company as a board member, would that be attractive to a VC? Or will they dig deeper and see how actually involved they are in the company?
Certainly I think it is attractive. It's not going to be enough to make a difference to a VC. But if you can attract that kind of talent, a VC is going to say, okay, well, with that will come networks, customer acquisition, etc. So it's certainly attractive. The issue I'm trying to kind of point towards, though, is that when I've seen so many situations where people lean further towards the name or the brand, and that blow up because there's not strategic alignment in terms of the vision where the company's going. So you're actually creating a friction within the board that is, potentially going to be a big distraction for the company.
And then I think this one is for Rick. How do you ensure governance when the CEO is also, one of the primary members of the board?
So what you have to do in the very beginning is inform the CEO, these are the guidelines that we're going to follow as a board. These are how we're going to conduct our meetings. These are the things that we're going to look for. These are the things now that I am on the board as a non-employee. These are my governance responsibilities that I am going to impart on this board. These are the responsibilities that you as the CEO and the chairman of the board have to follow and adhere to. So there's an information dialogue that goes back and forth that lets this entrepreneur and CEO know what he or she has to do to fulfill that governance responsibility or that fiduciary responsibility.
Have any of you ever seen a case where the CEO went rogue and needed to be replaced or voted out? Maybe you can give us an example. You don't have to give us any names.
They're asking me to relive.
Or you can.
So I was an investor in a startup company about 4 years ago, and 2 years into this company, the outside CEO that we had was not doing a very good job, and we as the Series A investors were very concerned that he was not doing his job well. And it was a 3-person board, as I described earlier. So we as shareholders met or the bigger shareholders, and decided to, and we had this individual step down, and I was elected by the preferred shareholders to go on this board for this specific task to fire the CEO because he was not fulfilling his responsibilities and was doing a bad job. And that was a very difficult situation. We actually ended up having legal counsel, our legal counsel in the meetings, his legal counsel in the meetings, and eventually it was resolved 48 hours before we actually filed the lawsuit. But we were ready to replace him via a legal challenge. And it was very difficult to do when he owned 40% of the company. And he kept most of his shares even after we recapitalized the company. But we ended up firing him, and it took 6 months and about $50,000 of additional legal fees that we had to incur to do it. But I was on that board for 6 months. Very, very unpleasant.
So, what are the lessons of Theranos here? Any of you can answer that.
Lessons of Theranos.
Don't lie.
Ever.
Watch out for pride.
Oversold.
Does everyone know what Theranos is? The lady in Silicon Valley who started that blood working company.
She's a Houston girl. She's from Houston, Elizabeth Norris. Don't beat that.
Well, what about kind of the responsibilities, if any, of the board, of advisors potentially that she built, and was
She built
it?
the board of all those famous people, George Schultz, and all these big name people. Her investors were very large, well-funded family offices and not-for-profit organizations. So one of you
They
said
didn't
that
advise her very well.
No, I
Right,
said-
so it goes to that point.
they didn't tell the truth. And the one or two board members, as I've seen a couple of things and read parts of the book, the one guy who was an Apple board member who discovered all this and went to her about it, she fired him. She kicked him off the board and replaced him with another big name person who didn't do the right things necessary to make her accountable. Very sad.
So is there legal exposure to a board when you're potentially, I know you mentioned, getting D&O insurance, and that's usually required by public companies, but sometimes smaller startups don't have the funding for it. So is there any exposure, and I don't know if in your cases when you did companies that weren't public, to the company or to the members when you can't get D&O insurance, and kind of what does that look like?
Typically, you just form the advisory board if you can't actually do the D&O insurance. But it does cost a lot of money, and for startups, that's a hard thing to swallow.
So we will require in the term sheets to have D&O insurance when they form a board. It's not a lot of money. It'll be anywhere from $1 to $3 million in coverage typically, and it will cost anywhere from $7,000 to $12,000 on an annual basis, and we require them to do it. So if you're going to be a board, if you're going to take our money, you're going to take our $500,000 and the other $1 million from the other investors, you're going to spend $7,000 a year, $7,500 a year to have D&O insurance for us to help you. And that's how we raise it for it. So we require it. I won't serve on a board without it.
Have you seen cases where people haven't done it the right way and not gotten D&O insurance?
Within the CTAN organization, I would say no. I'm sure there have been instances of it. I'm so familiar with what we do in CTAN that I can honestly say I don't recall not having it as a company out of our portfolio.
And Sandy, what about you on the VC side? Have you seen VCs not have D&O insurance or not have it when they're on a board, or is it always?
Honestly, I'm not sure. It doesn't surface to the level of due diligence in venture capital investing, so I don't have experience there.
It's my experience when the VCs write the term sheets too,
I'm sure that's correct.
they look at it.
They look at it. Okay. One person said, to make it clear, a board for entrepreneurs will not have this line in the sand relating to governance as required by public companies, and so you have to create it. So do outside investors rely on the board for that? Or will they set their own governance? How does that work?
They generally rely on the board members to have some education around it and to help the entrepreneur understand what those responsibilities are, the duty of care, and all the other fiduciary things that they have to do. So we have to help educate them. I wish, as I said earlier, NACD has some better tools to help these very early stage companies, because it is a challenge for people going on these boards sometimes also to, without the right experience and background doing this, to understand what those fiduciary and governance responsibilities are. So the entrepreneurs certainly don't have that education and knowledge.
And I think Sandy once mentioned, and Rick, about, sometimes it can be not the investor, not the company, you get an independent, board member. So where does one go about finding one? Is it NACD, or how do you find somebody that's not actually actively involved in the company to serve on a board?
Yeah, I think NACD would be a great source of for those kinds of candidates. These kinds of networking opportunities where you can have mind share and find out first whether you have alignment strategically in the way you view the world in your sector, I think are very important. And then I think there are a host of other networking organizations. A lot of our sponsors would be those kinds of organizations as well.
And Chris, did you find? I think you found some outside board members, right? And so where did you find them? How did
Through our networks and through our private equity networks. So, and investing circles are amazing opportunity for that, because they see that all the time. So angels and VCs are well versed in it.
And is it important to have someone that's served on a board? I mean, obviously somebody has to have a first time, but have you found it more successful when, much like a second time entrepreneur, it's a second time?
Yes.
Statement, not a question. Do not serve on a board that does not have D&O, from someone in the audience.
I agree.
And I guess, Chris, any other sort of lessons learned or tips for both entrepreneurs but also for potential board members on how to be better board members?
For board members, don't spread yourself too thin. After we sold the third company, and it was all during the time of we have to get women into the workplace and onto these boards, and so my phone started ringing because I was both an entrepreneur and had a public company experience, and it was very flattering, but I had to take a step back and say, okay, what am I really passionate about? I can only, I can only serve so much, and so I kind of thought through the three things. I think I can only be on three boards at a time, and I wanted to be on a board of a startup to help the entrepreneurs, because that's what I'm passionate about. I wanted to be on a board of the arts, because before agricultural and natural gas pipelines, I was a musical theater performer in New York City, and so I have an MFA before my MBA, and so I wanted to give back and use my business and artistic acumen, so it's always serving on a board of the arts, and then also a nonprofit that was local here in Houston. And so because of that, then I was able to find the right fits and not spread myself too thin, and also be a much better board member for those organizations.
And Sandy, you sometimes interview founders on how their relationships are going with their board members. And so what have you sort of gleaned from good relationships and good board members versus, bad ones, especially when you're evaluating, again, investors that might sit on a board as well?
What I'm looking for often is what you might have heard as the NPS score, the rave factor, right? How much does a founder really rave about their board member and vice versa? So you're looking for, if you know NPS score logic, you're looking for sort of that 9 or 10 out of 10 comment. You're going to get the 7 in every reference check. You're going to get kind of a 7 out of 10 naturally. So really paying attention to the nuance of that conversation is really important. Obviously, we're looking at exactly what was added in storyboards that exemplify, the rave factor, the claim there. So those kinds of things. The other thing I find particularly attractive about founders are those founders who are seeking out diversity of opinion explicitly. So those founders that want to be challenged, want to attract not just like minds, but actually some unlike minds, but the unlike minds that they respect. By diversity of opinion, of course, I do mean primary characteristics, but not just primary characteristics of diversity, but the broader concept of debating points of view. I think that's enormously important and something I see highly correlated to successful founders.
That's the answer to your Theranos question, is you want to have board members that are going to present a different opinion and really almost fight with you, and make sure, I want somebody that's going to, be there for me, but also definitely challenge my thoughts and my strategy.
And so you mentioned a lot about this advice that you want to be, diverse, and what would you say is the difference between advice and, an actual piece of board matter or that you have to cover? So is there a difference between just advice that you're getting from your board and actual decisions you have to make as a board? Are there,
So I think I know what you're saying. So, so big strategic questions are very appropriate for the board, as Rick has laid out. Then there are often board relationships where you want to be very clear, if you're speaking to a board member, that you're not raising a board issue. Maybe you're asking for advice on how to approach a certain person. Maybe you're trying to network around somebody you need an introduction to. Those are not board matters. So be clear in your communication about whether you're speaking of a board matter and the board member needs to be putting that hat on, or are you actually talking to them as a mentor?
I think, too, it's helpful, your point, Rick, about public company boards and startup boards are very different. However, startups can really, if they structure it from the get-go, like a public company board, and public company boards have very distinct lines of, there's an audit committee, there is a compensation committee, and so on and so forth. So if you set that from day one as a small entrepreneur company, I think you're setting yourself up for success to kind of help with that, your question.
Cool. Do we have any other questions from the audience?
Yeah.
Actually, if you don't mind writing it down and they can pass it to me.
I already wrote 4 questions to you.
Oh.
I liked your idea about setting up all the subcommittees approach right at the beginning. In fact, my humble suggestion was if you put advisory audit committee or SOX committee and some of the ones that bigger companies have, put all of them as a checklist and put it under the CEO for the time being or one of the guys, and then offload from his basket as the board becomes bigger and stronger and so on. I think that will be slowly getting into congruence with the bigger company approach. But you start small. When you start small, have the template.
Exactly.
By the way, just so you know, being an entrepreneur so hard, that's why I had so much respect for these. I've never been an entrepreneur in my life, not in my DNA. You cut me open, there's not a DNA cell in my body. You know what the failure rate of startup companies is? This was a study done by UC Berkeley and Stanford University. 91%. 91%. So I often ask myself, why do these entrepreneurs want to get in a field where 9 out of 10 of them do not make it? It's so hard to be successful.
Have you seen any correlation between the successful entrepreneurs in that set and what their board may have looked like? Have there been, I don't know, or anecdotes or studies on, to be a successful entrepreneur, they have good boards, or what makes that 9%, or is it just pure luck and Vegas?
No, there's a whole, we don't have time in this session here, but there's been studies that have the 6 or 7 traits or characteristics of successful companies, and there have been studies made on the ones that go out of business, so the top 6 or 7 reasons why they fail. And so those studies are available. I mean, when it comes down to these hardworking, they found the teams, the differentiated technology, and the laser focus, and a couple other things. But over here was a lot of things that, and money, by the way, was 3rd or 4th on the list. Running out of money was not the top reason why they failed. So there's studies out on those kinds of things. I have to admit, in trying to recall all that information, I don't think boards were on either one of those lists.
I can't speak for others, but I can speak for myself, and the reason why I do it is for the love of the game. I love building things. And even though it seems like my background in the performing arts, to transition over to building companies is really weird. But at the same time, that prepared me because I moved to New York without a job and auditioned every single day for Broadway. Auditioned, got told no, and then randomly met these two guys that were starting up a natural gas pipeline company and said, quit that. I'll teach you how to build pipeline companies, and said, okay. But if I hadn't had that experience of being told no over and over and over again, I don't think I would be where I was.
There is an investor I know who claims he's got 140% internal rate of return on startups because he will only invest in companies who do, when he does his they call that study of
Maslow's hierarchy, yeah.
of personalities, he will take them out for coffee or dinner and determine what category they're in, and if they're only in that category, will he invest in them? And he claims he's got 140% return on his capital because of this one thing that he does.
Which category?
What's the category?
I know you're going to say that.
Well, I think one of those 7 traits by some VCs would be, a diverse founding team. And so to that end, how do we increase the percentage of women and minority founders getting funding and getting to these successful exits when potentially the majority of the VC CapEx goes to a specific founder type? Nothing wrong with them, but...
Well, board members come from networking typically, right? So do your networks look and sound like you, or are your networks, are you seeking out networks that have diverse opinions? I think it starts there. What would you guys say?
I think it's a long road, and I think that everyone has to look at their little universe and say, what can I do to move the needle forward to get more diversity? And I went to the Rice Executive MBA program while I was building the 3rd company and loved every minute of it, but I was shocked that there was only 8 women in the program out of 60. And so in my mind, I said, okay, what can I do to change the needle? And it's not, Rice has a lot to do, and what can I do? And so actually, Allison Young, who was here, and sponsor Bernstein, we got together and we said, okay, well, let's found a nonprofit where we go into lower income middle schools and do this, exactly this, do panel discussions with all women, talking about the diverse careers that they could have, and just getting into the schools, speaking into the lives of both boys and girls, to show them that, yeah, we can move the needle.
Yeah, so we're actually, we talk about this a lot in our own organization and in Austin, and our angel organization today in Austin is 22% female. And we say that's terrible. But it was 5 years ago, it was 11%. So we've doubled it, and it's still terrible. And women, I think, make better investors in women entrepreneurs, because they can. Sometimes we as men have these biases that we don't have. We try and avoid, but we have them because we're men. And I think it's good to expand the investor base with more diversity of women in angel investing, so that they can help female entrepreneurs with investments and consulting and advice. We can do that too as men, but I think we can work to increase our investor base in our communities with more females. We have an obligation to do that, and I think we should. And I think the venture capital community is finally waking up to it, which is good. But they have a long road to go.
Yeah, it's a pity that only 9% of decision makers or VCs are women. So I guess we can all invest in the Artemis Fund and change those statistics. Okay, any specific comments on AI startups, which are the flavor of the day but often fail?
We've invested in several of them that have failed. We've invested in a few of them that are doing well. It is a big focus area now, but there's a lot of other focuses too. We see a lot of focus today on fintech. We see focuses over the last 24 months on cryptocurrencies. So artificial intelligence is one of them, but there are others too that are rising above where they've been in the last 3 or 4 years previously.
Can you talk to some other areas, of investment that are exciting to you, and actually for all of you?
Active aging, for sure. I mean, I watch my parents take care of all 4 of my grandparents still, and there's a ton of opportunity for good to change the current systems. And it's a huge industry as well. Active aging, the elderly care, and
Silver tech.
technology based around that, and silver tech. Yeah, I love that. Yeah.
I would say telemedicine is a big focus area that helps, and that not just with the aging population, but also many other patients, and in particular aging. So there's several startup companies in Austin that are doing quite well in that space, and have made differences in many people's lives. And that's a very cool thing to see.
I would say in VC tech investing, it's a lot of those buzzwords, right? That don't mean much by themselves, but when you dig in, there's a lot there. So big data, AI, cybersecurity, SaaS recurring revenue models with capital efficiency, working in their favor. Those are the areas that I'm seeing.
Any other, questions from the audience? And if not, any final thoughts from our panelists?
Get involved in your entrepreneurial communities. It makes a difference, and in Houston, it's a very good entrepreneurial community, and I would encourage all of you to do that.
Sandy? What's exciting for you at the moment?
Exciting for me at the moment, seeking out the best venture capital firms that I can find and bringing them here to Houston to meet with our great entrepreneurs. I think that concept is going to help us at an inflection point here in Houston.
And Chris?
What's exciting for me is to be a woman founder in a pioneering industry that has just been legalized.
And driving a tractor.
And driving a tractor. Awesome pictures.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much.
Let's give our panel.
Dana, thank you very much. That was great, and I think it shared a lot of ideas in a short period of time, which I know a lot of y'all leave here today can build on. A lot of your points, having spent a lot of my career in working with some technology startups, were right on point. And I wish I would have heard you when I was 28. So, but, we're going to leave the bar and food open for a while. Everybody feel free to network and take your time leaving. So thank you very much.
Thank you, guys.